has a good lesson, but he is, and I'm enjoying this, stepping out of his comfort zone just a little bit tonight teaching here, but he will do a fine job.
I was going to say that Corey, Bart, and I drew straws, and Bart lost because he had the lead singing. So we all three maybe did something we're not always the number one person to do. So this is it's a little different for me to be here teaching this way. I started a long time ago teaching high school kids. And then I taught middle school for 7 years, and now I am a principal, and I talk to faculty all the time. So I'm used to people not listening to me for the last 20-something years. So this might be a different experience, I hope, and we'll at least talk through some things. I teach a class on Sunday mornings, and so I wanted to use some things that I've used there, but maybe not be totally repetitive, because I hear the feedback too, like he's talking about. I hear that hum gets louder. I don't know if that's up there or not, but I understand what he's talking about now. But I wanted to use something we've talked about but not be totally repetitive. We're on Sunday mornings in my class, we're doing a survey of the Old Testament. It was meant to be about a 6-month survey of the Old Testament, and I think we're currently in year 4. So we just continue, and we're going through things chronologically. And what we're doing on Sunday mornings is we've been talking about the end of the kingdom of Judah and talking about the things that occur there. And so we're gonna talk about Daniel, but we're gonna look at some of the historical context of when Daniel lived and some of the things that led to his. I've called this lesson Daniel's education. So we'll kind of talk through that. I will also say one last note. I'm not great at finishing things in one lesson, so I'm going to do my best to get through this. Usually I just pick up where I left off the next week, so this will be kind of weird for me too. But we'll talk through whatever we can. All right, so we're going to talk about Daniel, and to talk about that from a historical context a little bit. In the world at that time, Assyria was the kingdom who had been in power, but Babylon is now coming to power. And Egypt is on the other side, and Egypt had an alliance with Assyria, and they don't want Babylon to come to power. And so what happens a lot of times for several years is that Judah is caught in between Egypt and Babylon as Babylon is coming to power. And so this creates several different conflicts. We're going to start in 2 Kings chapter 23 and just look at a couple of things there. I have a different version, so I'm going to read directly from here. It says, Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away and brought him to Egypt, and he died there. So what we're saying here is that Egypt is kind of in charge of Judah. Even though Judah is still a kingdom, Egypt is kind of in charge. And it goes so far as to say in the next couple of verses, Jehoiakim is paying taxes, you could say, to Pharaoh Necho, paying him money from the people. And so Jehoiakim is beholden to him. He says, Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land in order to give the money at the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land, each according to his valuation, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Then verse 37 is the key. Jehoiakim did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done. Now there's lots of kings throughout this time. Some do good things, some do bad things. But specifically, Jehoiakim is referred to here as someone who did evil in the sight of the Lord. I think that's an important context when we think about Daniel. Sometimes we think about he was taken into captivity, and that's where the evil started. Well, he came from an evil place. Judah at the time was evil, and so Jehoiakim here is leading the people in the wrong way, and we know that leads to their captivity. So just getting some context of what Daniel grew up in when he was young. And how that might have affected him later on. Now, there's a big historical battle. If you study the battles of the time, I told Bart I was going to use the laser pointer just to impress him, and then he's not even in here to see it. I'll use that in a minute. The Battle of Carchemish happens in 605 BC. And this is an important battle in the kingdom of Judah because Necho, the Pharaoh of Egypt, goes through Judah to fight against King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And he goes through there, and he actually loses and suffers great losses. And so he's traveled north through Judah to fight and stop the kingdom of Babylon coming to power. But he loses. And so he retreats south back through Judah. And this is when King Nebuchadnezzar, first comes into Judah. He's chasing Egypt down south, and he stops in Palestine. And this is when he first makes contact here with Judah. So Babylon is over here to the east. Egypt is in the west. And here's my laser pointer moment right there. There's Judah right here, Jerusalem right in here, in this area through the middle. And so Necho travels up here to Carchemish. There's a big battle here. And this is when Babylon really takes control of the area, the known world at that time. They had already kind of wiped out Assyria. And this was basically like Pharaoh Necho's last stand against the kingdom of Babylon. So in the world at that time, it's a big moment, but also in the world of Judah, in the kingdom of Judah, it's a big moment because it brings Nebuchadnezzar to their door. He at the time was still working up in the north, but now he's chasing Egypt down to the south, where they are, I guess you could say, licking their wounds over the loss. And so 2 Kings chapter 24 starts this way. It says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and then he returned and rebelled against him. So Jehoiakim first commits to Pharaoh Necho. He's paying Pharaoh Necho money. He's taking money from the people, giving it to Pharaoh Necho. Well, now Pharaoh is down back in Egypt, and now Jehoiakim is paying money, or he's beholden to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So this is really when the world changes, and it's when the first people of Judah are taken into captivity. And so this is kind of what the context is leading into the book of Daniel, as far as kind of how he becomes to be in the kingdom of Babylon. I will say also another issue is that there's other things that are falling apart at the time as well. There's other kingdoms, but mainly the big point is Babylon is growing, taking control, and Judah is caught in the middle. So Nebuchadnezzar's goal, he wants to take control of the west. So he comes across, takes care of Assyria. He wants to control the west, looks after Judah there. He gets Jehoiakim, the way he wants him, has him under his control, under his thumb there. And while he is there, he takes the first group of Israelites into captivity, first group of Israelites from Jerusalem and Judah. Now the kingdom in the north, Israel, kingdom in the north is already gone. They've already been carried off into captivity. But the southern kingdom of Judah is now, this is the first group, this is the first time they've really been carried away into captivity, which is part of the punishment that God has promised them for many years. So in 2 Chronicles, it says it this way: Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacked him and bound him with bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. He's talking about the king, Jehoiakim. And Nebuchadnezzar also took to Babylon articles from the temple of the Lord and put them in his temple there. So that's a significant statement that not only did he take the king captive, he took some things out of the temple. So he is destroying Jerusalem and taking things from there and taking it back home. And so that's obviously significant to the Jewish people to have the temple defiled and have things taken from the temple and taken to be under Nebuchadnezzar's care. Now, Second Chronicles doesn't say any more. That's what you get in Second Chronicles. But if you go into Daniel, you get a very similar statement here in the first two verses. It's almost the same couple of verses here for comparison. It kind of goes into a little more detail. It says that he brings the vessels to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. So a little bit more detail there, but again, you could say that is a travesty for the Jewish people, that their precious items from the temple are now being used to worship in a place. They're being used in a place of worship for Nebuchadnezzar's God. So this is obviously a time when the kingdom of Judah is very, very near the end, and things that are very precious to them are taken. Now, this is where we finally talk a little bit about Daniel. So that's the context of how Daniel gets to Babylon and how we get the story of all the things in Daniel. There's so many good stories in Daniel, examples. Most people obviously talk about the Daniel in the lion's den or the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those things are all there. I really love this first chapter because, again, thinking about the context of where Daniel came from, Daniel didn't exactly have a great background to come from. He lived in Judah when Judah was very evil under a king Jehoiakim who had led the people away, and now he's going into captivity in Babylon. And so, he hasn't had, or we don't know everything about his life individually, but we know the kingdom of Judah was in a bad place, and that's where Daniel grew up. So here's the rest of what Nebuchadnezzar did, verses 3 and 4 from chapter 1. It says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans." So this says a lot of positive things about Daniel. If Daniel is one of these, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we know them, they were one of these men who were chosen. So it says lots of good things here about them. It says that they were of the royal family. Some of them were of the royal family and of the nobles. They were youths. There was no defect, good-looking, intelligence, understanding, knowledge, and ability to serve the king. Just one other brief thing there. Notice it says they're going to teach them the language of the Chaldeans. The book of Daniel is actually, and again, I probably could do a lot more research on this, but as I was reading today, the book of Daniel is actually written in two different languages. The first few chapters are written in Hebrew, and some of the other chapters are written in Aramaic. So that might indicate the fact that they have learned and changed that language a little bit as they've been there for a time period. But anyway, they are taken there to be educated. So think about now, this is really Daniel's and the others. It's kind of like their second education. They had a first education in Judah under King Jehoiakim, who was not a good example, even though he was the king of God's chosen people. Now he's going to Babylon, and someone who is certainly not going to follow God's practices, and he's going to be re-educated. Daniel is one of these young people. Again, don't know exactly his family connections, but from this indication, he may have some connections to nobility or the royal family. He was maybe an important person in some way there in the kingdom of Judah. And for a conquering kingdom, this is kind of the things that they did. This is how you break the people you have conquered. You take some of their best, and then you get them on your side. You take them home to your place, and you educate them what you want them to be like, and you break the people that you have conquered because they don't have their own leaders anymore. This is how they viewed Daniel and these others. They wanted to basically put the people of Judah under their thumb and under their rule. And so you take the best of the best, you re-educate them, and then you use them to help you with that. So that's kind of what the mindset there is. We're going to take a side note for a second into Jeremiah and just talk about this for a second. Why were the people of Judah carried off into captivity? There's a few verses in Jeremiah. We know the story, but there's a few verses in Jeremiah that I think point this out really well. Chapter 25, verses 3 through 7. It says, "For 23 years, from the 13th year of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, until this very day, the word of the Lord has come to me, and I have spoken to you again and again, but you have not listened." So this is Jeremiah speaking to the people about why they're going to be carried off into captivity. Over and over again, I have spoken to you. "And though the Lord has sent all his servants, the prophets, to you again and again, you have not listened or paid any attention. They said, 'Turn now, each of you, from your evil ways and your evil practices, and you can stay in the land the Lord gave to you and your ancestors forever and ever.'" So they had the gift of a land that God had given them, and he would have continued to give that to them had they listened. Verse 6 says, "Do not follow other gods to serve and worship them. Do not arouse my anger with what your hands have made, and then I will not harm you. But you did not listen to me, declares the Lord. And you have aroused my anger with what your hands have made, and you have brought harm to yourselves." So a couple of things I think are interesting here. This is why the people are carried off into captivity. As a principle, there are times when there are kids that get in trouble. And I was just in a conversation the other day with somebody at school, and when I was a teacher, sometimes the kids who got in trouble were the ones that I seemed to have a good connection with. And I would try to talk with them and try to get them to do differently. I still try to do the same thing now. Sometimes teachers, when a student is repetitively in trouble, they'd like to throw stones at them and all kinds of things. And I sometimes bring the student in and I'll talk to them. And, sometimes the teachers are frustrated with that, but sometimes that's how you can reason with them. But then there's a time when the consequences come to bear. And eventually the talking kind of ends and you have to give out those consequences. I told my class on Sunday morning, I had a meeting at some point with the family, and we placed the student on a behavior contract, and it's spelled out. These are the 4 things the student has to do. If the student does not do these 4 things, this is what will occur. And I sign it, the student signs it, the parent signs it, and then we regular communication for the rest of that year. Then we meet at the end of the year and we say, "Hey, these 4 things were not met. You didn't do the things here, and so therefore you get this consequence." And parents were astounded, couldn't believe that that's what was going to happen. And it's tough in that moment. It's tough to say, here we are. Yes, we tried and we tried and we tried, and we gave you chance and chance and chance, but now here's the time for the consequences. That is the context of where Daniel lived and where Daniel grew up. He lived in the time when the consequences came to bear on the people of Judah. They had many chances. King Josiah is referenced here. King Josiah was a good king. He restored the people well. And then when he is killed, his son takes over, and the very first thing that it says about him is he did evil in the sight of the Lord, just immediately after watching his father be a good king. So they have lived with warning after warning and they have not responded. And now the consequences are there. And now Daniel, even though Daniel and many others might be good people, they're going to face the consequences just like those who have made the poor choices, which I think is probably another tough lesson to learn. Is sometimes good people get caught up in the consequences of others who make bad choices. And I think that might be something that would refer to Daniel here, and we know probably that would refer to people of our day at times as well. So lots of things there to learn just from the fact of, why did this happen to the people of Judah? Why did they have to be carried off into captivity? They were living in the promised land. God, for the whole history of the Bible almost, here's the promised land. That's what was talked about. And they have the promised land, and it's taken away. It's gone. I was thinking too, when how to apply this to our own selves. It's easy to say we don't necessarily have a promised land, but we have a promised kingdom if we want it. And we have warning after warning to do things well if we want to earn the kingdom of heaven in the way that we should. So it's a very good analogy there for us to kind of read that and kind of, you could say maybe discouraging to read what's here in Jeremiah, but hopefully something will help us remember that as well. Okay, so that just, again, talking about what Daniel has experienced, what the people of Daniel's time have experienced, why they're being carried off into captivity, and maybe, again, going back to this is just my name for this lesson, what type of education Daniel may have had prior to this moment of truth, which he is coming to here in Daniel chapter 1. So he was educated in a time when Judah was evil, and he was taken captive into an evil Babylon to be re-educated. He must have been one of those that are referred to as a youth who was good-looking and intelligent, possibly of nobility. So he's taken from a good situation, potentially of some kind, into captivity in Babylon. So it's easy to say he could have been discouraged just from that. He is a person of promise, and that's being taken away from him. They were to be taught for 3 years before being placed into the king's service. So he was going to have 3 years of this re-education. I say taught because I think the word indoctrinated might be a better word here. He was going to be indoctrinated to the new Babylon way. Here's what we want you to know, and here's how we want you to help us. So the question here would be, how is Daniel going to respond in that moment? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are mentioned here in chapter 1 as well. They are referenced as being into captivity, taken into captivity with him. And so, we're going to see here in chapter 1 exactly how they respond in this moment. So chapter 5 is the part, we probably know this story, and we probably know what Daniel chose. Now, there's things about this that we could spend a lot of time talking about food and what they were allowed to eat, what they're not allowed to eat. We know those. I'm not going to go into those kind of things. But just think through, if you were Daniel in this place, kind of how you might respond in this moment. So it says here, Daniel chapter 1, verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. So they're eating from the king's table. So again, I would say just a side note, the way to get people on your side is to treat them well. So the king of Babylon, he knows this. If I want these Jews that I've taken captive to help me out in my service, I'm going to start out by treating them well. I'm going to give them food from my table. I'm going to give them, good treatment there to try to encourage them to be on my side. Now, all 4 of the men are referenced here in verses 6 and 7. The 4 names that we know, it uses their other names, but those are listed there. Verse 8 is where we see Daniel's response. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. So Daniel, whatever's led up to this point, Daniel has a belief that's important to him. He has a set of beliefs that are important to him. What he eats and what he drinks are important to him, and it's part of their history and their culture and their religion that he do certain things the way God has told him to. And he resolves not to defile himself. Now, I love, there's a couple of things I like about this verse. And again, if you read different translations, there's probably different words here, but I love the word resolved. It doesn't say first he asked permission, right? First, he resolved not to do it. And then he asked permission. I love the way that is written. He wasn't going to do it, whether he got permission or not. He resolved not to defile himself, which I think is a great point. We tell kids all the time when we're talking to them at school about things, whether it's in chapel or other settings, if you haven't made up your mind what you're going to do before you're put in that situation, you might not make the right choice. Resolve first. I'm going to not do these things, and I am going to do those things. And then when you're in the moment of choice, your answer is easier. I think that's a great thing that Daniel does here, is to be resolved. Now, he does ask permission, which I think is interesting. But it'd be interesting what happened if the chief official said, no, you don't have permission. It'd be a different story to find out how Daniel responded in that moment. I think Daniel would not have eaten, based on what I see here in these words, that he resolved not to defile himself regardless. So he is committed, again, regardless of whatever his circumstances were prior to this moment. He has a set of beliefs and a faith, and he is committed to those things, and he's resolved to it. So he does speak to the official, and he convinces the official to test them. I think this is in verse 12 and 13 of chapter 1. He says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he's resolved not to do it. He's going to do it this way. He asks permission. Then he's confident enough to say, let's have a test. Now, there's been a lot of times when I think in my mind, I know what we should do in this moment. Like whether it's a choice, a faith choice, whether it's a choice at work or whatever. But I might not be so confident to say, let's test my theory out. But Daniel is confident. He says, one, I'm not going to do it. I'm resolved. And two, let's see what the results are, and you tell me what's better. Let's put this to the test. That shows a lot of faith, too, that he was willing to put this to the test, and the chief official test him in that way. I respect that a lot, because I know it's sometimes difficult to put yourself under the microscope. And that's basically what he's doing here. He's going to be inspected to see if what he says is accurate. I also think just the whole issue of Daniel does not appear to care what the consequences are. He's going to do what he believes is right regardless. He resolves first not to do it. He says second, let's test it. So in my mind, that says, hey, if it doesn't work, then I'll pay the consequences. Much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Same thing later on in the book of Daniel. God will take care of us. And if he doesn't, that's okay. We're still going to do what's right. And that's what they resolved to do as well later on in the book of Daniel. So 10 days, there's a test. And so for 10 days, Daniel and his friends eat the things that they say that are best for them. And they're not going to defile themselves, and they're going to eat only what they should eat in their minds. Verse 15, the chief official inspects them first. And the chief official says, or it says this about the chief official, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Now, I have a friend at school who has decided to be vegetarian for a while. And so he tells me I should be vegetarian because I'll be more healthy. I don't really know if that's true or not, and I don't know if I could only eat vegetables. I think I would struggle with that. So I don't really know what the true physical comparison of that would be. But what I know is here in the Bible, 10 days is not a whole lot of time either, I think, to there be visible results, right? If you went on a diet for 10 days, would there be a lot of visible results? I mean, sometimes maybe, but sometimes not. But here in 10 days, there's a visible difference between what they looked like and what the others looked like. I wrote a note somewhere in my notes, and I don't know where it is, but I would say this. This is just a small note. People notice when you make good choices and when you do the right things. There's something that's noticeable about that. And so they notice here that Daniel and his friends made good choices. It's a physical appearance that they notice, but still, from that, they know, hey, those people made a hard choice, and they did that, and look at the results. They can see those results, and I think that's something to remember as well. So a couple of things then to finish up, and then we'll make a few points at the end. Verse 17, I like this one as well, because remember what Daniel's done right now in the moment. Daniel and his friends, what they've done is they've done something physical, right? They've eaten certain foods. It's physical, but it's also part of their faith and their beliefs. It's kind of like Solomon asked for wisdom, but he got a lot more than wisdom, right? He got everything because he could have asked for everything and didn't. I think this verse right here is good for that reason as well. It says, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So not only do they look healthier and look better, but they're smarter than everybody else too. And specifically, it says God gave them this knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And so God is blessing those, who do the things that he's asked of them. And I think that is certainly significant. And again, think about the impact on those around them as well. When you see those who are doing certain things a certain way that are blessed, other people around them go, hey, maybe I should do things that way. When we do things the right way and people see the results of things we do, think about some of the service projects that we do. When we do things the right way and people in the community see the results of that and see the good that is done, maybe they want to join and see and be a part of that. And that's, I think, again, just a good application for us to think about is when we do things the right way, it's noticeable to those around us. So finally, they're brought before the king, and the king talks with them, and it says here that he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So I do find it interesting. There's moments when I'd love to know what Nebuchadnezzar's and other people in the Bible, I'd love to know what their thoughts are. Remember, the goal was to take the Jews and educate them the Babylon way and indoctrinate them with the Babylon way. What the results are is he's educated by them and impressed by them more than he is by his own educators. Those who were going to be the indoctrinators are not as impressive as Daniel and his friends. They're the ones who are impressive. And Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they serve the king. They're in captivity. They're serving the king, but still doing things the way that God would want them to do. So that's the story kind of that I wanted to look at. I have just a few points, just if we haven't hit these at some point, we can hit them here at the end. I think one thing we learn from Daniel is it's easy sometimes for us to make excuses about, well, my background is this, or my upbringing is this, or my situation is this, and so therefore I don't always do things the way I should. Daniel had lots of reasons that he could have made excuses. Again, remember all the things we talked about. He didn't have a good example at home in Judah. He had an evil king and other evil people around him. He could have used that as an excuse to just give in and do whatever the king of Babylon said. He was a person of importance of some kind, and now he's taken into captivity. Who knows what happens there? And he could have caved and used that as an excuse, but he didn't. He displayed wisdom and faith and resolve, and I think that's a good example for us to follow as well. This is interesting. I thought of this. Don't be discouraged about your children or your grandchildren. There's lots of things on the news and in our society today that are discouraging about how evil things have become or are becoming, depending on how you look at things. And I know probably there are some people in this audience who could have said this to me when I was a teenager. Probably you might have said the same thing. But I think I get a lesson from this, that regardless of what society is like around us, good people can still do good things in the middle of that, as long as we stay committed to our faith and commit to the things that we're supposed to be committed to. So Daniel was surrounded by evil. And you could easily say that we today are surrounded by evil and still have to make good choices there. Last thing, I think they were blessed in many different ways through their obedience. Daniel and his friends were obedient. It said specifically they were blessed with wisdom and understanding. You could easily say they were blessed with safety. They were taken into captivity by the king. They could have been thrown into prison, but they weren't. They were given places near the king to be at his side, to be at his service, to advise the king for many years. Daniel did this for many, many years. He served the king. He was in a good place. He was taken care of. And so he was blessed through those things. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we know things are hard. And when things are hard, we still have to be committed. But we have blessings when we do the things that we are supposed to do. All right, I think we came pretty close to the time frame, and I finished my notes. So for those of you who are in my class on Sunday morning, you should be impressed that for once I finished my notes and we didn't run over on time. For everybody else, you wouldn't know, so that's okay. But let's close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this time that we can be here tonight and study your word. We just pray that what we've done has been pleasing to you and also encouraging and strengthening for all of us, and that we can live out our lives each day in your service and help your church to grow and spread your word. Lord, we know we don't always make the right choices, and we pray for forgiveness, and we're grateful for that forgiveness that we have through Jesus and his death on the cross. It's in his name we pray. Amen.